Welcome everyone. Today I want to talk about how to set up your MVC project with Vue.js. Primarily what I want to touch on are the things that you should be watching out for and just the general tools and workflow that you can use. So first of all, let's go ahead and have a quick overview of the project here. In my startup, there is nothing really too flashy. All I have is add controllers with views, and I serve some static files, which we'll get into later, and yeah, I'm just mapping my controllers with the default convention. So you may see Webpack here, and we'll get into this in just a bit, but the main thing first I want to talk about is how you're going to be blending in or how you're going to be extending your application using Vue.js. So if we go into the controllers and have the model binding controller, the primary collision that you're going to have with using MVC is model binding. So if we go into model binding, I have a simple model, which is kind of like a very generic example, but hopefully this will be good enough to highlight some of the ideas. So all I have is an album that has a title and a list of songs, and then we just have a song that also has just a title. Okay, and this is primarily going to be used as an example to highlight a very simple thing that you would think is simple to implement, but once you get down to it, it actually becomes cumbersome, and a lot of pain can stem from basically making a dynamic UI to appease a sort of like adding multiple things on the form. So it's all about model binding and creating complex forms, right? So with MVC only, let's say we want to be able to create this new album. Okay, so we'll go into views, model binding, and I have my MVC only view here. So general form, we will have an input. We have a couple of, like 3 inputs for each individual song and title. Imagine if you want to remove or add this particular song, you need to keep track of these indexes that you're putting here, how much you have here. So this will essentially involve you writing some complicated JavaScript to essentially manage this form, right? This is where the first problem will occur, and we'll go through this example. We'll run in a bit, but I first want to go over what I have. What are other like parallels of this you can have? So then you have MVC and Vue, all right? So you're sort of you have this MVC world, and then you have the Vue, and you're sort of more or less using Vue to support your MVC rather than Vue taking over MVC, where that example we'll look at as well. So MVC and Vue, what happens here is usually I've put a comment, so all the source code is in the description. You can go ahead and check it out, and this should set up a reminder. Is the gist of it is you have the ID on your section in your HTML, and what will happen is once your Vue application loads, it will re-render this part. So if you try to use model binding of Vue with model binding of MVC together, Vue will basically just come in once the page loads, and it will just wipe everything that MVC has done. So in that regard, what you need to do is you need to work around by passing state from MVC into the Vue world. And as you can see here, I am not going to be using Axios or Vue to submit the form. I'm still using MVC to model bind it. So you can see I have songs. They'll keep track of the index, but I also have the title. Okay, but the model binding, the value that Vue binds to the input form still comes from Vue. But by the end of it, when I submit the form, this is still part of MVC, okay? And the way I preserve the state, so again, we go back to the controllers, you can see I created a test album. So this is some, basically, you want to be able to ultimately create a record and then edit that record. So this example is sort of, we go past the creation stage, we go straight to the edit stage, okay? So in MVC and Vue, what we do is we create a little helper where we take the current state of whatever we want to edit, and we will serialize that to JSON and then use HTML raw. Otherwise, you're going to get in trouble with colons and stuff like that. And we pass it into this state. So what happens next is MVC and Vue, all we do is we basically just assign the state to our application. And this is how we take care of basically MVC will first render the page, and once the page is brought into the browser, we will have this JSON object assigned to this state, and then we can load that state into our Vue application. So Vue will mostly control the model binding where it is hard, like basically adding new things to new records to a collection and removing those. So basically tracking that, the amount of JavaScript, you can see I even written it in line, and all the re-rendering happens automatically. That can be quite simple. But this is really the most complicated bit, the part where you have to pass state around, and basically the more complex your form is, the harder it is to basically manage the passing of the state from your MVC side to your Vue side, okay? And by the way, anywhere where I want to use Vue, I create a partial, okay? So a partial Vue.js here, where I have the script. So if the version changes, if the CDN changes, you only have to change it in one place, okay? So you're not going around every single page tracking, like, oh, where did I put my Vue.js? Yeah, it's only in one place, okay? So we include that, and by the way, if and at the bottom, I just grabbed the script where I have in my www root. So to serve this script, I still use static files. So this is pretty much the setup. The hardest part, again, when you're blending MVC and Vue, is passing around the state. Again, this solution is, you can check the code, and that will be in the description. And if you're going to be putting these inside a script section, again, I left some comments as guidance. You want to sort of bulk all of these three together in that section, okay? So the primary reason you might want to do this is because then you get one load, because of the reasons that I'm going to state right now. Is if we go to the view only way, you can see I have three actions just sort of appease this way. We will first have to display the page. We will then need an endpoint for loading the data, and we will have to also bring in a HTTP client like Axios, or use the fetch API that usually it's still not complete, so Axios is the preferred way to go. But probably in the future you want to use the fetch API. And then we have to use the from body, because now we're posting JSON. We're not posting from data, form data. How we are doing it here. Again, you can do that in Vue.js, but again, you will have to do a little bit more work there. So if we look at Vue only, again, we are only just bringing in Vue.js. As I said before, we will need an HTTP client, and I'm just bringing in a script. And here you can see I don't actually need to pass a model. You can still use a model here, but just keep in mind that if you're going to be combining MVC with the Vue only mode, where Vue manages most of the model binding, so it's mostly about model binding. If you are passing the model into this view, make sure it has nothing to do with the actual model binding. Make sure that it is maybe to just display some kind of message or something like that. Make sure that it is not, it has nothing to do with model binding, and all your model binding is then only handled by Vue. Okay, so here you can see I have my model. When the component is created, I go ahead, get my state, I assign it to the model, and then I have my methods where I can then post to the Vue only data creation, right? So post with Vue only data kind of does the same as the create album. Again, we'll just go through these one by one in a minute. Actually, let's do it now before we jump to the manage state. I'm gonna launch this. So here we are. Let's go ahead to managed binding, model binding, I mean, and MVC only. So this is your bog standard form. Again, as I've written in the comments there, imagine trying to add buttons and writing all your JavaScript for basically tracking the DOM, putting IDs on there, all using JavaScript to handle all of that, and keeping track of the index of the range, right? It's a pain in the ass, but basically when you do send it in the end as the album, it is all bound, and it just works. It's really nice. And as I said in the comments, for MVC only, it's a safe space for simple forms, right? So your complexity in MVC only occurs when you need to do something complicated with the forms, like maintaining a list or basically multiple records, or if there are conditions. If you fill this out, you need to fill more of this out. right? When that sort of complexity occurs, that's why Vue exists, right? To make that part simpler. And that's maybe when you want to blend it. But again, with that, you have your state management problem. So let's go ahead and take a look at what happens when we go to the MVC and the Vue bit. Okay. So MVC and Vue. So here we can remove, add, right? And this is Vue.js handling this, right? And we still get the model binding on the MVC side. So if I inspect the elements right here, the input, you can see we have the songs and it tracks the index. And just to sort of restate or revisit the place where I actually do the model state binding, so MVC and Vue, you will see that I have songs, but when I select, that's when I actually grab the index. So that's when I actually assign the index, and within that I can sort of track the index, and when I push, I make sure I add a new index. So there is a little bit of that where you kind of need to adjust what you're doing, and that solution is going to be different if you go the Vue only way. Okay, so one primary thing is, how does this script tag look? This is just to give you an idea, that again, to remind you that the Razor rendering, so this part right here, this gets rendered on the server, so the browser is going to receive that state. That state is going to be visible in the internet traffic. So in the elements, we can go ahead and take a look at the script tag, right? So you can see the JSON right here. This is returned as part of the network. So if I refresh here, you can see the very first page we get, there is no state here because we don't actually bind it. Vue is not loaded at this part. This is the second call that it does to basically bring in the Vue library, and then it re-renders the page to populate it here. As our first response from the server, this is where we have the state, and this is where we reference the state in the MVC and Vue file, right? So this is how state gets passed around, and to some extent, this is what server-side rendering for Vue.js and other SPA framework work, okay? So this is just a general idea of how it works and why it works even, or how you can basically grab the state from your Vue MVC world and pass it on to the Vue world, okay? So next thing, again, let's actually just submit it for fun, right? So we're gonna add a few more, 1, 2, send it, and here we are. So we can take a look at the album. We have 5 songs. The third one is 1, fourth one is 2, right? So you get that model binding, and we don't have to use the from body because we're still in that MVC sort of binding world where we're using Vue to support it, okay? I'm repeating myself a little bit here, but hopefully I'm getting the message through. And by the way, at this point, there is going to be a problem that you can solve with Vue, which doesn't relate to the model binding. But essentially, Vue is a model binding mechanism, but you can also use it to manipulate the DOM. And it is okay. You do not run into the state problem where you can lose the state when you're re-rendering the page. If you're just using it to manipulate the DOM, like do the animations, display different tabs, right? That problem never occurs if you're just using to basically make your UI look pretty, right? If you are actually doing model binding, that's where the main challenge occurs. Okay, so let's pass through this, and let's go ahead and take a look at the Vue only state. So here we are. So what happens is, if we refresh, you can see we get the main page. It looks just normal. Then we have the Vue package load, the access package load, and then the script that we have written. And once our Vue only app loads, you can see it is grabbing some data. So you have to make a few extra calls to the backend to actually grab that state. So you're not passing any state to Vue. Once Vue is loaded, you're then going to grab that state. So this alleviates a lot of the complexity. If it is too complex to pass your model from the MVC side to the Vue side, you go with this approach where you can just go ahead and grab the state from your backend using a JavaScript HTTP client. And then usually the model binding to the JavaScript world is a little bit simpler. So if we take a look at Vue only, you can see that I'm not using indexes anywhere. Okay, so at this point, I'm just using songs here to basically just have the actual representation. I'm not using indexes. So when you are you going in the view only mode, your model binding therefore gets simpler, okay? So really the takeaway is here, if the form is simple, use MVC. If the form is like mid complexity, where you can basically still rely on passing your state from MVC to the view world, you can go with that. If it's high complexity form, it's easier to just go full out view, let all the client side dynamic functionality handle the hard parts, okay? So that is generally that side. Let's go ahead, add something, send it, and at this point, what did I get here? Envelope operation, that's probably the in breakpoint here. Yep. So let's try again. And by the way, this is just another thing with the MVC side. As you could tell, we hit the backend, but because we get a page load, we can easily do a redirect. Okay, so in that other sense, having MVC and Vue blend can help there as well. But if you're doing this as Vue only, you will then have to handle the redirect in your browser. Okay, but it's actually worth it, because if your form is mega complex, having just a simple redirect in your JavaScript isn't that bad compared to passing all that state from MVC to Vue. But again, you should be trying to reduce complexity in all parts of your application. Okay, so let's take a look at the album. We have our 4 songs, yada yada. Okay, so stopping the application there. The next thing is general project structure, organization. What can you do to improve it, and how do you use Webpack? Generally, some of the tools that you can use. So as the extensions go, there are pretty much 2 extensions that I used. I haven't spent too much time in the environment of developing MVC and Vue alongside in one project. We moved to basically just using spas with MVC APIs, okay? And I'll show you how to set up projects for that as well. But this is, if you have an existing MVC project and you want to extend it with Vue.js, this is what you do. So you have the Vue.js pack 2019, and we have the Webpack task runner. So the reason you don't use Power or whatever it is it's a little bit harder to integrate it with your pipeline. So Webpack is a little bit easier. It's just a task in your package.json. And by the way, you can still use package.json. But yeah, essentially Webpack Task Runner, what it does is it gives you a dedicated tool inside Visual Studio to run your task. Okay, and Vue.js pack is just some syntax highlighting. But yeah, you essentially have these 2 packages which you can install, and what you have is you have a package.json, okay, and yeah, whatever packages you need, you specify them here. And I think it will be in your dependencies. Yep, npm here, they will be displayed, so you can still sort of have an overview of what packages are installed and stuff like that. And again, in package.json, I guess another important thing to note is we have this build webpack, which you can trigger manually, but we're going to take a look. And basically, once you install the extension, you have this task runner where you can then, this one, where you can then trigger these builds on your own. And just to give you an overview of what kind of power you can extract from Webpack and how to use that with MVC, but it is going to put some constraints on. So this tool, we have a Webpack config, and just to quickly go over what it does, we grab all the JavaScripts that we have inside the views. So here I have a managed view, and managed just stands for managed files, how we're managing files. You can see I have it named manage.cshtml.js, okay? So even if you are using Razor pages to sort of pass some stuff into review and then model bind it that way, so you can still intercross them the way I've showed you in MVC and Vue, so you can have Razor and Vue working that way. But then in addition to having basically your cshtml.cs file, you can also have cshtml.js file. And they will all be bunched up under that one group, so you're not going to have an explosion of files. You can basically cascade them. So that's a really nice thing if you're using Visual Studio. I don't know what the situation is if you're using VS Code. But yeah, essentially I have the managed CSHTML and managed.cshtml file. This is pretty much the same as the Vue only version. And in Webpack config, what we do is we grab all our JavaScript file here. We create the entry file, which we then basically tell Webpack what we want to grab, okay? And then for each JavaScript file that we have found in the views folder, we aggregate it to a controller name pattern underscore view name. Okay. So if you have highly nested controllers, so if your views go model binding and then one more, you can't do that. Okay. So this will lock you into a sort of frame, and you could probably stick more parts into here, like, I don't know, subcontroller or something like that. So can't even spell, but yeah, if you have subcontroller, but then this would get a little bit more complex. Okay, but this is a very simple solution. This was just meant to give you sort of a push in the direction of how you can organize your files. Okay, so you have your JavaScript file. We load any JavaScript files that we have, and then we basically say, right, just output them somewhere in the dist/js folder. So here we have dist.js and model bind manage. So you can see the name is first controller name and then the view name. And here it is, all this crazy Webpack goodness. And what will happen is in my managed view, I set the layout. In other ones, I don't set my layout. All right. And what I do in the layout is right at the top, we extract the controller name, we extract the action name, and we assign the JavaScript file that is responsible for this view. All right. So for the page that we're displaying, we have a specific JavaScript file bound to that page. Okay. There's a bunch of ways that you can handle. Do we have a JS file at this action? No, don't render it. But essentially, again, here's where I have my Vue.js. And imports work, by the way, with Webpack. I'm going to show you again. If we go to manage.cshtml, you can see I'm doing a require. And again, you can extend your Webpack to use Babel, and then you can use all the good JavaScript syntax with imports and stuff like that. But if you import Vue through here, again, it will work, but your model binding managed file will get a little bit bigger. Okay, so this works. Again, it will include Axios in the model bind underscore managed package. And let's take a look. Where was I? Kind of lost it. Okay, so yeah, in the layout, we have the Vue.js file, and then we have the scripts file. Okay, so the scripts file, just for any page that you land, it will load that specific file. Okay, so let's take a look at how that works. And actually, before this, by the way, this task runner, what it does is it watches for changes in your JavaScript. So we can go ahead, click watch/develop. And what this will do is will basically watch for changes in any JavaScript files in your views folder, and it will automatically rebundle your model binding managed JS. So anything in your JavaScript, this JavaScript will get recreated. So let's open manage CSHTML.js and managed CSHTML, close everything else. Let's run the application and let's see what happens. Okay, so here it is. Let's go ahead and go into managed. Here it is, the simple form. I also have hello world here, and this hello world message right here, it's just a test message that I output. It is something just to demonstrate this automatic rebuild. So if I expand this a little bit, and I say, let's say hello world 22, I press save, and you can see here it automatically rebuild it. So once I go back to the view and I refresh it, my JavaScript is rebuilt. So again, this is once you basically have it set up, Webpack development with Vue.js in ASP.NET Core and MVC, the way that you sort of want to extend your application to basically move away from the JavaScript or jQuery complexity, it can be done. Okay, and this is an okay development experience, not 5 stars, but it will still work with your integration pipelines and stuff like that. Yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed this episode. This will be it. If you did, leave a like, subscribe. If you have any questions, leave a comment. If you have any questions specific to the Vue.js setups for your projects or some problems that you have run into, do leave them in a comment. I will try to find answers for you on how to solve them. I will be making a few more videos on how to set up your projects with a SPA application and Nuxt.js, so make sure to subscribe. I also stream on Sundays and Wednesdays, so make sure to join my Discord channel and keep up with the updates. Okay? Yeah, hopefully I'll see you in my other episodes.